He cheated, Caleb said, microphone hot. Evan fabricated the demo results. The auditorium gasped while judges leaned forward like hunting birds. I felt Seattle's rain inside me, sudden, cold, and heavy. Prove it, I said, though my voice hardly sounded mine. Caleb smiled wide. Integrity matters, he added, eyes gleaming victory. The judges whispered, and the room began shrinking around me. Our prototype flickered on screen. Perfect code turned suddenly into suspicion. Cameras caught my face while Caleb angled toward the applause. I won't forget, I whispered, tasting copper beneath careful breath. If winning meant lying, I'd rather build truth in daylight. The startup showcase glittered with banners, venture capitalists, and bright coffee. Caleb and I had built prototypes in Dad's garage. Tonight he presented mine like it belonged to his conscience. He claimed I falsified metrics, inflated trials, and misled beta testers. The judges paused the session and asked for my documents patiently. I opened folders, hands shaking, trying to unspool months of work. Caleb leaned beside me, whispering, "Step down before this gets worse." I stared at his tie, remembering third-grade field day. He tripped me then, smiled, and accepted the ribbon proudly. Winning always mattered more to him than being an honest brother. Our mother, Laura, sat halfway back, clutching her handbag like prayer. She looked between us, choosing calm over confrontation, like always before. Richard Hayes, my mentor, checked his watch and shook sadly. Samantha Reed stood near the exit, jaw tight, eyes refusing disbelief. "Tell them the process," she mouthed, and I straightened slowly. I walked through datasets, trials, and vendor contracts line by line. The lead judge nodded, then asked about an email Caleb mentioned. Caleb produced printouts, alleging I promised kickbacks for better numbers. They were fake, but convincing, dressed in familiar fonts and timing. My pulse roared while security waited like statues near the stage. "Disqualified pending investigation," the moderator announced, voice thin and merciless. Applause returned for Caleb, warm as theater lights on faces. I gathered cables, stuffed prototypes into my backpack, and swallowed glass. Outside, rain stitched the streets, a gray curtain over Pike Place. Caleb called immediately, offering pity flavored like victory, smooth and cold. "Withdraw quietly," he said, "and I'll protect your reputation later." I stared at the ferries sliding like ghosts across Elliott Bay. "No," I said, "I won't vanish to feed your story." He sighed, then hung up, leaving seagulls to finish speaking. Somewhere inside, a door closed, and another cracked open stubbornly. By morning, my inbox filled with cancellations, meetings evaporating like steam. HR suspended my badge, citing policy and optics, not evidence. Investors unfollowed, and old colleagues avoided eye contact at coffee. Richard called, voice gravelly, telling me to stand still today. "Truth walks slow," he said, "but it never misses appointments." Samantha brought soup and a plan scribbled across notebook margins. "Start over," she said. "We'll build where they can't interfere." I nodded, but grief sat heavy like wet lumber inside. Outside my window, the Space Needle pierced low clouds like certainty. I breathed, counting seconds, learning how silence can steady storms. Caleb and I grew up in Tacoma, sharing bunk beds. He raced me everywhere, stairs, bicycles, scores, even birthday wishes. Dad taught fairness, but cancer took him during junior year. After that, winning became Caleb's religion, comfort, and broken mirror. Mom worked doubles, praying we'd stop competing like hungry dogs. I wanted partnership. He wanted crowns, cameras, and closing applause. In college, he plagiarized once, then blamed me without consequences. I forgave him, believing brothers learn better after honest stumbles. Tonight proved I'd mistaken habit for accident, mercy for wisdom. Some people don't mature, they just weaponize charm with practice. I walked Capitol Hill until dawn, shoes soaked, mind strangely clear. Seattle smelled like rain, coffee, and second chances growing roots. I wrote goals on a receipt, lines trembling under streetlight. First, heal. Second, learn. Third, build where truth breathes freely. I would not chase Caleb. I would outlast his noise. I would measure success by nights I slept without fear. I would choose partners who valued decency over dazzling quarterly slides. My name mattered more than trophies, because sleep loves honesty. "I'll rebuild," I whispered, "and I'll keep my soul intact." The sun broke through clouds, and I started walking home. Rock bottom didn't knock. It just moved in quietly one morning. I woke to find my apartment mailbox stuffed with notices and apologies shaped like bills. My company email was gone, my projects reassigned, my name marked suspicious. The news cycle called Caleb a prodigy, a visionary, a self-made success. I became the forgotten footnote, a cautionary tale people whispered in elevators. Mom left voicemails that sounded like prayers disguised as small talk. "You and your brother will work it out," she'd say, voice cracking mid-sentence. I'd nod even though she couldn't see it, just to keep her believing. Seattle rain hammered the window every night, rhythmic, relentless, and uncaring. I wondered if the sky was mourning with me or mocking my collapse. Samantha tried to help, but shame turns friendship into hard labor quickly. "You can fight this legally," she said, dropping documents on my table. I stared at the words like they belonged to someone stronger, not me. "He forged evidence, Evan. You have to defend yourself," she insisted firmly. I shook my head, knowing the cost wasn't just money, but my sanity. Fighting would make me live inside his lie longer, and I was tired. "Let him have his victory," I said. "I just want air again." She looked at me like I was surrendering, but I wasn't. Not really. Some wars aren't worth winning if you lose what's left of peace. When she left, the apartment felt colder, echoing with unspoken disappointment everywhere. Weeks turned into months, and unemployment turned pride into rationed coffee spoons. I sold my gaming console, then my couch, then half my wardrobe quietly. Rent stretched thinner each month, and my credit score sank without resistance. Still, I refused to call Caleb, even when hunger made my vision swim. I took odd jobs, data cleanup, freelance code reviews, anything that paid cash. Every time I filled a form, my name felt smaller on the screen. The world moved on, and I learned how invisibility can feel like mercy. At night, I'd walk downtown, past offices glowing with other people's purpose. I'd catch reflections of myself in windows and barely recognize who I'd become. Failure didn't look tragic. It looked ordinary, like a man just standing still. Richard called again one evening, his voice steady, older and unshaken. "You still know how to build something from nothing?" he asked bluntly. I hesitated, unsure whether he meant computers or courage after so much loss. "Because if you do," he said, "I've got a warehouse that needs wiring." It wasn't glamorous work, but it was something honest, something mine again. I showed up the next day with a borrowed toolkit and quiet resolve. The space smelled like dust and hope mixed with burnt coffee and steel. Richard handed me gloves and said, "This place will teach you patience." Each wire I connected felt like stitching pieces of myself back together slowly. When I left that night, my palms hurt, but for once, the pain felt clean. Days blurred into a rhythm that didn't need applause to feel meaningful. I arrived before sunrise, left long after the last train rumbled downtown. Richard paid in cash, but his real payment was belief disguised as sarcasm. "You're too honest to stay broke," he said, tossing me an old laptop. "Use it for something better than regret." I smiled, the first real one in months. Small but alive. That night I worked on side projects, lines of code glowing like prayer. They weren't inventions. They were therapy typed in syntax and logic quietly. I didn't have clients yet, but for the first time I had purpose again, and sometimes that's enough to start climbing from the hole someone else dug. One evening, I saw Caleb's interview on a late-night tech segment accidentally. He was talking about ethics, smiling like a preacher who sold recycled sermons. "Integrity," he said, "is what separates lasting success from temporary luck." I laughed so hard it turned into coughing, tears burning from disbelief. The host nodded, oblivious, praising his leadership and social responsibility campaigns. I muted the screen and stared at the reflection of my empty room. Maybe he had everything, but it looked exhausting, the kind of winning that costs sleep. I whispered to the air, "Keep it all, brother. I'll take the quiet." The silence afterward wasn't bitter. It was strangely peaceful, like acceptance starting to bloom. Sometimes losing isn't failure. It's freedom wearing a different face. The first step back was small enough that no one noticed it happening. I started taking small freelance projects through a local online board quietly. Most were debugging gigs or back-end cleanups no one else wanted anymore. The pay barely covered groceries, but it filled my nights with purpose again. Each problem solved reminded me that my brain still worked, even if my name didn't. Richard checked in sometimes, pretending it was casual curiosity, but I knew better. "You're rebuilding," he said one morning, handing me a cup of coffee proudly. "One day at a time," I replied, eyes fixed on the warehouse lights flickering. He grinned and said, "That's how we built the first airplanes. Screws, sweat, and second chances." I didn't believe in miracles yet, but I believed in momentum, and that was enough. Samantha came by one Friday with her hair tied up and sleeves rolled high. "I have a client," she said, "and they need help no one else can offer." I laughed, assuming it was charity wrapped in friendship again, but she shook her head. "I'm serious, Evan. They want transparency in software design. Your thing exactly." I hesitated, fear whispering old lies about my reputation still being poison. "They don't know or care about your past," she insisted. "They just want results." That night, I opened my laptop and reread the proposal 3 times carefully. It wasn't huge, but it was honest, and it gave me something to protect. For the first time since the betrayal, I stopped surviving and started planning forward. I emailed my acceptance before midnight, smiling at how hope now fit in my inbox. The company was small, a medical records firm drowning in data inconsistency. Their system was broken, slow, insecure, and one crash away from lawsuits. They needed trust restored, not just software fixed, and that's where I found redemption. Each night I coded like I was rebuilding my own reputation line by line. Samantha handled contracts, bills, and coffee runs while I drowned in logic. When we deployed the final version, it ran smoother than anything I'd touched before. The client called me personally, thanking me for saving his family business emotionally. "You didn't just fix our system," he said. "You fixed our faith in people." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the screen for a while. For once, I didn't see shame looking back, just quiet competence and steadiness returning. Word spread faster than I expected in small business circles across Seattle. People valued honesty again, something I thought died with. Dad's generation. More projects came, each one bigger, more demanding, and more fulfilling simultaneously. I didn't advertise. My work spoke, and clients listened to its language fluently. Samantha joked that I'd become the guy who fixes lies with code. It made me laugh because there was truth in her teasing somehow. Each line of logic I wrote cleaned the stains of Caleb's deception silently. I was still cautious, still scarred, but I felt something new blooming quietly. Success wasn't a storm this time. It was sunlight creeping in through patience. Every morning I woke grateful, steady, and unrecognizable from the man who'd once begged for fairness. Months passed, and my reputation quietly grew without noise or vanity. One afternoon, Richard visited the workspace holding a folder with city seals stamped. "You're ready for something bigger," he said, sliding it across the table confidently. Inside were papers for a government tech contract I never imagined touching again. "They need someone independent to design a verification system," he said firmly. "Someone they can trust." I hesitated, remembering Caleb's lie and the fire it burned through my life. "Why me?" I asked, voice half disbelieving, half afraid to hope fully. Richard smiled, eyes warm and knowing, replying, "Because you've already proven truth can stand trial." I looked at the forms, my name typed neatly beside lead consultant. My pulse steadied, realizing maybe losing everything was the tuition for integrity. Samantha helped me file paperwork and form a legal company under my name. "Brooks Integrity Solutions," she read aloud, smirking at my choice of title immediately. "Too on the nose?" I asked, but she shook her head with conviction. "Perfect," she said. "It tells them who you are before they even meet you." We rented a tiny office near Green Lake, half storage, half promise. The first night there, I assembled desks and ate takeout on the floor happily. The city lights reflected through the blinds like constellations made for dreamers. Samantha raised a plastic cup and said, "To clean beginnings." I laughed and replied, "And to never losing sleep over winning again." It was the simplest toast I'd ever given, but it felt like truth with flavor. By winter, my small company became the quiet name in ethical software locally. We trained developers, built transparent systems, and helped others rebuild reputations like mine. Sometimes clients told me my calm unnerved them, in a good way, like they felt safe. "You're too peaceful for this industry," one joked after a long project meeting. I smiled, knowing peace wasn't lack of fire, it was control over it now. Samantha ran operations like a general, keeping chaos away from creation entirely. We were a 2-person revolution, restoring trust where competition had burned it away. Every paycheck, Every thank you note felt like healing stitched together, professionally. And in quiet moments, I caught myself wondering if Caleb ever saw my name again. I hoped he did. Not out of spite, but so he'd know what truth can build. The first step had turned into the first chapter of something new entirely. My life wasn't defined by his lie anymore, but by how I answered it. And I answered it not with noise, lawsuits, or revenge, but with creation instead. Still, a small part of me wondered how long before our paths crossed again, because in stories like ours, peace and conflict share the same horizon always, and I could feel the wind shifting, whispering that my test wasn't over yet. But this time I was ready. Not desperate, not angry, just steady and awake. Caleb had taught me one lesson well. Lies are temporary architecture. Truth, if built right, doesn't fall. It just waits for the storm to pass. And when it does, the builders of truth are still standing to rebuild again. Growth came slowly, like dawn creeping across the blinds, 1 inch at a time. By spring, our small office had 3 employees and a list of returning clients. Every project came with its own scars, its own lessons about honesty. Samantha joked that I had turned integrity into a business model, and maybe she was right. I didn't chase contracts anymore. I chose the ones that meant something real. One day, a nonprofit from Portland called, asking us to rebuild their donor system. They said they wanted someone too honest to take shortcuts, and the phrase made me smile quietly. Each day at work felt like restoring balance to a world that had forgotten fairness. Richard stopped by often, offering gruff advice and silent pride behind his tired eyes. "You're fixing what we broke years ago," he said once, and I understood exactly what he meant. Still, with growth came pressure, and pressure has its own kind of silence. We worked 12-hour days, balancing deadlines with exhaustion and purpose. Samantha ran payroll from her kitchen table, fueled by caffeine and sheer faith. "You realize this could actually become big," she said one night, voice both proud and worried. I shrugged, typing through another round of code reviews until dawn. "I don't want big," I said. "I just want steady." But even I could feel momentum building like a quiet tide underneath us. The city began to notice our small firm's efficiency, its clean record, its calm precision. By summer, Brooks Integrity Solutions was being called Seattle's most trusted small tech agency. The title sounded strange in my mouth, like wearing a suit that finally fit after years of trying. The real test came when we landed a corporate ethics audit for a large construction firm. They wanted us to review their software compliance for internal contracts and billing transparency. It was the biggest job we'd ever had, and it paid enough to double payroll. But on the first day of review, I froze seeing the client name printed boldly. Brooks and Allen, Construction, Caleb's newest venture, built after his old startup's decline. "You okay?" Samantha asked, noticing the way my hands suddenly went still. "Fine," I lied, though the word burned like rusted wire in my throat. She leaned closer, reading the file, then sighed when realization hit her face. "Do you want me to decline the job?" she asked, voice low and protective. "No," I said, closing the folder gently. "If integrity's my business, I can't run from the test that defines it." The first week on site was like walking through a museum of my brother's mistakes. His name was everywhere. Plaques, blueprints, digital signatures, mission statements dripping with irony. Employees whispered about budget issues, missing files, and a tension that hummed under every meeting. I stayed professional, greeted everyone, and asked questions with clinical precision. Caleb avoided me entirely, delegating everything to his operations director nervously, but I could feel his presence through every evasive email and delayed report. Samantha kept our team focused, reminding me quietly, "This is business, not therapy." She was right, but part of me couldn't separate the two completely. Each uncovered flaw felt like reopening a wound, but I documented everything anyway. Truth, after all, doesn't bend to comfort, it bends to courage. Midway through the audit, I found discrepancies that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. Funds redirected, false invoices filed under shell vendors, signatures that didn't match records. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was unethical, and Caleb's initials appeared repeatedly. I sat there staring at the screen, torn between anger and disbelief, heart thudding. Samantha saw my face and whispered, "Is it what I think it is?" I nodded slowly, feeling the old ache of betrayal crawl back under my skin. "You have to report it," she said firmly, leaving no room for hesitation. "Even if it's him." I exhaled, long and heavy, then said, especially because it's him. That night, I wrote the report, every word clear, factual, and without personal venom. When I hit send, I felt both free and hollow at the same time. The next morning, Caleb called. His voice was sharp but scared, edges of control cracking audibly. "You're auditing my company?" he demanded. No greeting, no courtesy, just fury. "It's a contract from the city," I said, keeping my tone even and restrained. "You could have recused yourself," he snapped, as if ethics were optional again. "You could have told the truth years ago," I replied, and silence followed like thunder. "If you report this," he said quietly, "I'll lose everything." I closed my eyes, remembering the boy who once cheated in Monopoly and laughed. "Then maybe it's time you lose what never belonged to you," I said softly. The line went dead, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, just deep, quiet sadness. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's the sound of peace refusing to negotiate anymore. By the end of that month, the city terminated his contract and froze his assets. News broke like lightning. Headlines, articles, interviews filled every feed again. "Prominent developer under investigation for corporate fraud," the headlines read, echoing like déjà vu. This time, though, it wasn't my name under the microscope. It was his. Mom called, her voice trembling with both relief and heartbreak on the other end. "You didn't have to destroy him," she said, unable to see the truth clearly. "I didn't," I answered. "He built his own fire. I just refused to look away." She cried softly, saying she wished we'd been different, and I understood her pain deeply. The hardest part about integrity is watching it cost you family twice. Still, I slept that night for the first time in years without hearing his lies echo. Despite the chaos, our company grew stronger, our phones ringing with new opportunities. Clients respected the honesty, even admired the restraint I showed during public scrutiny. Samantha handled press questions while I stayed in the background, working quietly as always. "You did the right thing," she said one night, closing her laptop softly. "But the right thing doesn't always feel right," I admitted, staring at my reflection. She smiled faintly, replying, "Maybe not now, but someday it will." Outside, the rain started again, washing the city in soft gray forgiveness. I thought about Caleb, his charm, his fall, and how familiar his silence had become. Winning didn't feel like joy. It felt like truth, standing alone under the rain. And somehow, that loneliness was cleaner than any applause I'd ever chased before. The turning point came quietly, without headlines or fanfare, just a phone call one morning. A federal agency representative wanted to meet about a project our firm completed last year. I thought it was a routine follow-up, maybe paperwork or standard protocol, but when I arrived at the downtown office, they handed me a plaque. "For exceptional transparency and digital compliance," the director said, smiling warmly at me. My name engraved in the steel, proof that honesty could build more than pity. Samantha stood beside me, clapping softly, tears bright in her eyes. "You realize this makes you a national case study, right?" she whispered. I laughed quietly, half in disbelief, half in gratitude for surviving long enough to see it. For the first time, I felt like I had truly won, without taking anything from anyone. Word of the award spread fast, faster than I wanted it to, honestly. Clients doubled, offers came in from across the state, and I turned most away politely. I'd built my success on simplicity, and I wasn't about to lose that again. But amid the congratulations, I got an unexpected email. Caleb. His tone was uncharacteristically formal, a far cry from his usual charm. "We need to talk. Not about the investigation, about what comes next." I sat staring at those words for a long time, unsure what they meant exactly. Samantha read over my shoulder and frowned, biting her lip with concern. "You don't owe him closure," she said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "I know," I replied, "but I think I need to hear him once more. The only way to fully heal a wound is to face what made it bleed. We met at a diner off I-5, the kind of place we used to stop with Dad. The rain streaked the windows, neon lights painting everything in tired colors. Caleb looked smaller somehow, his suit wrinkled, eyes swollen with regret. "You look good," he said, his voice flat, fragile, and unsure. "You look like someone who's finally out of excuses," I replied quietly. He winced but nodded, accepting the truth like a man learning a new language. "I didn't call to fight," he said. "I called because I need your help." I studied him for a moment, wondering how many times I'd heard those words twisted before. "You need my help," I repeated, voice slow, deliberate, almost a question. "Yeah," he said, "and this time, I won't lie to win it." He told me his company was finished, but a new firm wanted him for consulting. They won't touch me unless you vouch for my integrity, he admitted quietly. The irony was so sharp it nearly made me laugh out loud. You want me to clear your name, I said, staring into my coffee. He nodded, shoulders hunched like a boy waiting for a punishment too late to avoid. For a moment, I thought of refusing, ending the cycle once and for all. But I saw something different in his eyes that night, something fragile and real. You're still chasing validation, I said softly, and I stopped running after it years ago. He looked down, ashamed, and whispered, Then maybe teach me how to stop. And just like that, I realized revenge wasn't my ending. Redemption was. I told him I'd think about it, though the answer had already settled inside me. The next morning, I drafted a letter, not of praise, but of truth entirely. I wrote that Caleb had made mistakes, that he'd broken trust publicly and personally, but I also wrote that he had faced consequences and that accountability itself was a start. I didn't excuse him. I just refused to define him by his worst act forever. Samantha read the draft and asked, Are you sure this is what you want? I nodded, eyes clear, hands steady over the paper's edges. If I don't let go, I said, then his lie still owns me. She smiled faintly, half admiring, half worried about my unshakable grace. You're the only man I know who could turn betrayal into philosophy, she murmured. No, I said, I just learned peace is cheaper than grudges. The letter went out that afternoon, and by week's end, Caleb called again. His voice trembled when he said, They hired me, Evan. They actually hired me. I could hear gratitude, disbelief, and something close to tears on the other end. You didn't have to, he continued, but you did, and I'll never forget it. I smiled faintly, looking out my office window at the city glowing below. Maybe now you'll learn that truth lasts longer than applause, I said. Yeah, he whispered. I think I finally understand. When I hung up, the silence felt peaceful, like the world had exhaled with me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant no longer waiting for repayment. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the younger brother. I felt like the wiser one. That same month, our firm landed a national government contract for ethical data design. The kind of opportunity most people chase for decades finally arrived quietly on our doorstep. Reporters wanted interviews, universities requested lectures, and old colleagues reached out with awe. Samantha and I expanded the office, hiring more people, building something lasting together. At our grand reopening, Richard raised a glass and said, You turned truth into currency, kid. Everyone laughed, but I caught the glimmer of pride in his weathered eyes. That night, standing among laughter and light, I thought about everything I'd lost. Each humiliation, every lonely night, every step through despair had paved this floor beneath me. Winning wasn't about beating Caleb. It was about reclaiming myself without losing my soul. I finally understood why Dad said real victories never need witnesses. They just need peace. A week later, Caleb stopped by the office unexpectedly, nervous but smiling sincerely. You've built something incredible, he said, walking through the glass doors slowly. No, I corrected. We built something right, he nodded, the weight between us lighter now than it had ever been before. I hope you know I meant what I said back then, he added quietly. I was jealous because you never needed approval. You just needed purpose. His words settled deep, painful yet oddly comforting, like closure knocking on an unlocked door. I learned that winning isn't everything, he said, voice breaking with honesty. It took losing everything to figure that out. I smiled softly, offering him a hand, not as a rival, but a brother. And in that moment, the turning point wasn't mine. It was finally his. The reunion came wrapped in ceremony, glitter, and irony, just the way life likes to test humility. A year after the letter, the Seattle Business Coalition announced their annual gala. Our firm was one of 5 nominees for Ethical Innovator of the Year, a title that sounded almost poetic given how my story began. Samantha insisted we attend, calling it a full-circle moment worth showing up for. I didn't argue. I just ironed my only suit and tried not to overthink it. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, polished marble, and too many smiles. Pretending to be genuine, I walked through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, hearing my name pronounced correctly again. Then I saw him, Caleb, standing near the bar, talking to reporters like he used to. For a second, the air left my chest, and time folded back into that night of betrayal. Only this time, I wasn't the man being erased. I was the one who'd survived it. He spotted me before I could decide what to do. his smile uncertain and human. "Evan," he said, walking over, his hand extended, hesitation trembling behind confidence. "Didn't think I'd see you here," I replied, my tone calm, not cold. "I work for the Coalition now," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Consulting on business ethics, of all things. Life's got jokes." I couldn't help but chuckle. The universe really did have a sense of irony sometimes. "You're doing good work?" I asked, and for once I wanted the answer to be yes. He nodded, sincere. "Trying to," he said, "and thanks to you, people still listen when I speak." For a moment, I saw not the liar, not the rival, but just my brother again, and that was worth more than any trophy they could ever hand me tonight. When the ceremony began, I sat at our firm's table, nerves coiled but calm. The host's voice echoed across the hall, introducing nominees and reading achievements aloud. My name came last, followed by a hush that felt heavy with expectation. I looked around, at Samantha, at Richard, at my team, each face glowing with pride. When they announced us as the winner, applause erupted, warm and genuine, shaking the chandeliers. I walked to the stage, heart steady, smile faint, carrying the weight of every fall behind me. "This," I began, holding the award, "isn't about success, it's about second chances." The crowd leaned closer, listening, maybe even feeling what I meant beneath the words. "Because truth," I continued, "isn't glamorous. It's just something you build every single day." The applause that followed didn't feel like noise. It felt like peace, made audible finally. After the ceremony, reporters hovered with microphones and eager questions waiting like bees. I answered briefly, smiling, careful to focus on the work, not the past. Then Caleb stepped up beside me, offering to help deflect their energy politely. "Let me handle the vultures," he whispered, half teasing, half earnest like old times. I nodded, grateful for the ease between us that once felt impossible. When the cameras turned elsewhere, he looked at me and said softly, "You belong up there, not me." I shook my head, smiling faintly. "We've both stood in the wrong places before," I replied. He laughed quietly, relief flickering across his face like dawn breaking through regret. It wasn't forgiveness in words, it was forgiveness existing naturally in silence, finally unforced. For the first time, I didn't feel superior or wounded. I just felt whole again. Later, on the balcony overlooking Puget Sound, we stood side by side quietly. The city shimmered below, lights dancing across the dark water like distant promises. "Dad would have loved this," Caleb said, voice fragile, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He'd have teased you for crying," I joked, smiling without mockery, just warmth. "He'd have told you both to stop competing and grab a burger," Samantha added, joining us with champagne. Caleb laughed, wiping his eyes, the sound lighter than I remembered it ever being. "You two are impossible," he said, shaking his head with disbelief and gratitude. Samantha raised her glass toward us, saying, "To brothers who finally learned what winning means." Caleb clinked his glass against mine gently, and we both whispered together, "To peace." The clink echoed softly, small but sacred against the hum of the city below. The next day, headlines featured our firm and a photo of us on stage. "Brothers Brooks redefine success through integrity and unity." The article title read brightly, "Mom called before noon, crying again, but this time out of joy instead of fear." "You did it," she said. "You both brought our family name back home." Her voice trembled as she added, "Your father would have been so proud of you boys." I looked out my window at the skyline, humbled by how far the fall had carried me. Caleb texted later, saying, "Let's do dinner. No business, just family. My treat." I smiled, replying, "Only if you promise not to make it a competition." He sent a laughing emoji, followed by, "Guess I finally retired from them." Maybe we hadn't fixed everything, but we'd finally stopped breaking what mattered most. At dinner that weekend, laughter filled the restaurant in a way I'd forgotten. Caleb ordered too much food, Mom scolded him, and I just sat back smiling quietly. For the first time in years, there were no walls, no comparisons, no hidden agendas. It was messy, loud, human, and beautiful, the way family's supposed to be. Between courses, Caleb leaned over and said, "You ever think we'd get here?" I shrugged, smiling faintly. "No," I said, "but maybe the road was supposed to be this long." He nodded, raising his glass toward me in a silent, humble toast. "For teaching me that truth doesn't lose, it just waits," he said. I clinked his glass, replying softly, "And for reminding me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." That night, As we walked out into the cool Seattle air, I looked at him differently. The rivalry, the resentment, it was gone, replaced by quiet understanding. I realized that we weren't just brothers. We were survivors of our own pride. Each of us had built towers on lies once, only to learn they collapse without foundation. You were right, he said as we reached the parking lot, smiling faintly. Winning isn't everything. I smiled back, watching the city lights blur through the mist. No, I said, it's not. But losing with honesty is worth more than winning with lies. We stood there, both quiet, both changed, and both finally at peace. Some reunions aren't about reconciliation. They're about remembering you never stopped caring. Guilt is strange. It doesn't always come when you're broken. Sometimes it comes when you finally start healing. After the gala, Caleb and I spoke often, but the weight between us lingered quietly. He was rebuilding his life, piece by piece, working consulting jobs with smaller firms. Sometimes he'd call asking about ethics questions, seeking guidance he once mocked me for. I never refused him, though each call reminded me of the years I'd lost. I don't deserve your time, he said once, voice low, guilt breaking through. Maybe not, I replied, but you're still my brother, and that counts for something. He went quiet, and I could hear him breathing like someone holding back emotion. I knew that sound. It was the noise of a man facing his reflection for the first time. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what he did. It was about not needing to remind him anymore. One afternoon, he stopped by my office unannounced, holding a small box awkwardly. Mom told me you never replaced your watch after college, he said. Inside was a simple timepiece. Nothing flashy, just clean silver with a black leather strap. I can't repay you, he added, but I want you to have this anyway. I looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry, then finally said, You really are trying. He nodded, his jaw trembling slightly, words caught between pride and regret. Every time I look at a clock, he said, I think about time wasted hating you. That hit harder than anything before because it wasn't confession. It was truth unguarded. I put the watch on, the strap cool against my wrist, ticking steady and sheer. Then don't waste another second, I said, smiling. We've got plenty left to make better. Still, even as life steadied, guilt found new corners to hide inside me. Some nights, I'd wake wondering if I could have stopped things sooner somehow. If I'd confronted him earlier, maybe he wouldn't have gone so far into deception. Samantha told me to stop carrying his mistakes like they were my inheritance. You were the victim, she said, not the cause. Let the past stay buried. But guilt doesn't follow logic. It follows love, and love complicates everything. I'd see Caleb trying so hard to do right, and part of me ached still, because even after all the healing, part of me missed who we were before pride broke us. That nostalgia wasn't weakness. It was memory refusing to surrender its last glow. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't erase sadness. It just made it gentler, easier to live with. Richard noticed my distance one afternoon as we wrapped up a training workshop. You're thinking? Too loud again, he said, sipping his coffee with his usual gruff calm. Just trying to make sense of everything, I said, staring at the half-finished report. He chuckled, shaking his head. You already made sense of it. You just don't like the ending. His words landed like nails hammered softly but firmly. You can't save someone from their past, he continued. Only show them the road out. I nodded, letting the truth sink in deeper than I wanted to admit. He leaned back and smiled faintly. And you, kid, you've done that better than most fathers could have. I laughed quietly, realizing how much of the man I became came from his steady guidance. Then maybe I've been forgiven too, I said, mostly to myself. You were forgiven the moment you stopped fighting ghosts, he replied. That night, Caleb invited me to his apartment for dinner, his first home since rebuilding. The place was modest but warm, filled with soft music and fresh flowers on the counter. No business talk, he warned, laughing as he handed me a glass of wine. Fine, I said, but only if you promise not to burn dinner. He grinned, flipping chicken like a man trying too hard to be domestic. You ever think we'd end up like this? He asked, tone somewhere between wonder and disbelief. No, I admitted, but maybe this is where we were supposed to end up all along. We sat down, talking about childhood, about Dad, about things we'd never spoken since the fallout. There was guilt between every word, but also gratitude. Two men learning how to breathe without armor. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough for both of us. Months passed, and his life began to rebuild into something honest and steady. He volunteered for community tech programs, Teaching kids about ethics and business. Feels like paying off debt, he told me one morning, but in a good way. I smiled, proud, watching the same ambition that once burned him now light others. He'd learned that redemption wasn't a speech, it was consistency over time. You're doing good, Caleb, I said once. Dad would have been proud. He nodded, eyes glistening but voice steady, replying, he'd have been prouder of you, Ev. I shook my head, not out of humility but understanding. We both knew better now. Pride didn't matter. Progress did, and for the first time we were walking the same road. And for once, guilt wasn't a weight anymore. It was just a reminder of growth. Samantha hosted a company barbecue that summer, inviting friends, employees, and family together. Caleb showed up early, bringing a cooler and an awkward bouquet of flowers for her. For peace offerings, he joked, grinning as she rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Apology accepted. 5 years late, she teased, handing him a plate piled high. Watching them laugh together felt surreal, like watching separate timelines finally merge. The old wounds had faded into stories we could actually tell without breaking. Richard grilled burgers while telling everyone how stubbornly honest I'd been since birth. He's proof that decency doesn't go out of style, he declared proudly. Caleb raised his drink toward me, grinning. Guess I had to learn the hard way. I laughed, clinking my cup against his across the picnic table. Sometimes guilt can heal faster when laughter finally finds its way through the cracks. Later that evening, when the crowd thinned and dusk turned the yard gold, Caleb and I sat quietly. The smell of smoke and grilled food lingered in the air like memory. You know, he said softly, I think about that night sometimes. The showcase. I glanced at him, unsure if I wanted to revisit that wound, but stayed silent. I lied, because I thought if I didn't win, I'd disappear, he said. But I lost you instead, and that was worse than losing everything else. The admission hung in the warm air, fragile and sincere, like confession at sunset. You can't rewrite it, I said, but you're writing something better now. He nodded slowly, staring at the fire pit until his eyes watered from smoke, or maybe regret, and for the first time I believe both of us had truly healed, not just forgiven. When I drove home that night, the city felt different, quieter, softer somehow. Streetlights shimmered across puddles, and I thought about how far we'd come. Caleb's guilt had become his teacher, and my forgiveness had become my peace. We were finally brothers again, not competitors, not rivals, not ghosts of ambition. I realized then that all those years weren't wasted, they were preparation. Pain, when faced honestly, becomes the blueprint for strength. I parked outside my apartment, staring at the night sky like it owed me nothing. I didn't need closure anymore, because life had already given me something better, clarity. Guilt, once a storm, had turned into calm waters reflecting who we'd become, and I finally felt ready to let the rest of the story belong to tomorrow. The morning light spilled through my apartment window, soft and forgiving, like life itself had decided to ease up. I sat at my desk, the old silver watch ticking quietly against my wrist. It marked time differently now. Not in minutes lost, but in moments regained. My phone buzzed with new projects, messages, and congratulations, yet I wasn't chasing any of them. After years of running toward validation and away from pain, I was finally still. Outside, Seattle hummed like a living memory. Wet streets, coffee steam, and the smell of rain on concrete. It felt like the city had aged with me. Slower, wiser, more deliberate somehow. Caleb and I were good now. Different men bound by shared bruises and rebuilt trust. He still called weekly, sometimes for advice, sometimes just to talk about nothing. Every time his name lit up my screen, I smiled instead of flinching. One weekend, he invited me to speak at one of his youth ethics workshops. You're the reason I started this, he said, voice soft but sure. I laughed, shaking my head, but something in his tone caught me deeply. Standing in that small gymnasium, surrounded by kids hungry to make their mark, I realized how far we'd both come. I told them about ambition, the kind that starts noble but can rot if left unchecked. I told them how truth isn't the fastest path, but it's the only one that doesn't collapse under its own weight. Caleb listened from the side, hands clasped, pride written all over his face. When I finished, the kids clapped, not out of obligation, but connection. One boy raised his hand and asked, "So, how do you know when you've really won?" I smiled, glancing at Caleb before answering softly, "When you stop needing to prove it." After the event, Caleb and I sat on the gym bleachers, watching the kids pack up. "You did good," he said, his voice low but warm, eyes glossy with emotion. "You did better," I replied, bumping his shoulder lightly. He laughed, shaking his head. "Never thought those words would come from you." I shrugged, smiling. "Guess we both grew up late." The gym lights flickered off, leaving us in a quiet pool of fading orange light. "You ever miss it?" he asked after a pause. "The race?" I knew exactly what he meant. The rush, the chase, the noise of competition. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not enough to go back there." He nodded, staring at the floor. "Me neither," he said, and his voice sounded free for the first time. I realized then that maybe growing up wasn't about success, it was about surrender. Samantha joined us later at a small cafe nearby, grinning when she saw us laughing. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you two actually like each other now," she teased. Caleb chuckled, pretending offense. "Hey, I've always liked him. I just hated losing to him." I rolled my eyes, sipping my coffee with mock seriousness. "Good thing you were never really competing," I said, and he laughed harder. The conversation flowed easily, light and unburdened by the ghosts that once haunted it. Samantha looked between us, her expression softening like someone witnessing peace bloom in real time. "You both needed this," she said. "The fall, the failure, the forgiveness." She was right. Without the pain, neither of us would have learned the weight of decency. And sometimes, the only way to build something unbreakable is to break everything first. Months turned into a year, and life became beautifully ordinary again. My company kept growing, but I made sure it never became a machine that chewed people up. We turned down contracts that didn't align with our values, even when they offered more money. "Integrity doesn't scale," Samantha joked once, "but at least it sleeps well at night." Caleb continued mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them learn through his failures instead of mine. Mom's health improved with peace, returning to the family after years of silence. Sundays became sacred again, dinners, laughter, and no talk about business or competition. Sometimes we drive out to Dad's old workshop, clean the dust off his tools, and just sit there. "He'd be proud of us, huh?" Caleb said once, voice cracking as he looked around. "He already is," I said quietly, and for once I believed it fully. That fall, a documentary crew reached out to feature our story for a business ethics series. At first I refused. I didn't want the pain repackaged for views, but Caleb convinced me it could help others trapped in the same cycle of pride. During the interview, they asked me the same question everyone eventually does. Was forgiveness hard? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Forgiveness wasn't hard," I said. "Holding on to the pain was." They asked if I ever wished I could go back and stop the betrayal before it happened. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "No," I said, "because losing everything taught me what matters most, and it wasn't winning." The camera lights dimmed, but I kept talking, words spilling out like quiet truth. "Some lessons can't be learned without being broken first. I'm just grateful we survived the fall." When the documentary aired, people reached out from across the country. Letters, emails, messages from strangers. Some said our story gave them hope to reconcile with family. Others said it reminded them to choose truth over ego. Caleb and I watched it together one evening, sitting in my living room with pizza boxes between us. "You really are a natural at this calm stuff," he joked halfway through. "Guess I had to balance out your chaos somehow," I said, grinning. When it ended, he stayed quiet for a long time, staring at the screen. "You think Dad ever watches us from somewhere?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "If he does," I said, "he's probably just glad we stopped trying to be him." Caleb nodded, smiling faintly. "And maybe he's proud we finally figured out what he meant by do right." Now, years later, I've stopped counting achievements and started collecting moments instead. The applause faded long ago, but the peace stayed like a heartbeat beneath every day. Sometimes I walk by the old auditorium where it all fell apart and smile quietly. That's where I lost everything and found myself again, piece by honest piece. I don't hate Caleb anymore. In truth, I never really did. I hated what his lie made me believe about myself, that I wasn't enough without winning. But I was enough, even then, and so was he. We just had to learn it the hard way. The watch still ticks on my wrist, steady, unhurried, reminding me that time forgives too. Maybe that's all life is, learning to live gently with the seconds you're given. If this story touched you, please like and share, and tell me, should I have spoken those words of forgiveness sooner, or was silence the truest way to heal?